want to go ahead. Thank you. So my name is Denisha Hamilton, and I am a licensed clinical social worker as well as a board member for the Ryan Bartel Foundation. The Ryan Bartel Foundation is a local nonprofit whose aim is to prevent youth suicide through awareness, upstream educational programs, and activities that support and empower youth, families, and the community at large through acceptance, connection, resilience, and hope. Tonight, we have two amazing professionals with us, and they are going to help us understand bullying and what we can do to help our children with understanding bullying. So I will allow Dr. Cerullo to please introduce yourself.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Cerullo. Dr. C is just fine for all intents and purposes. I guess I was asked to give you a brief overview. So this is my 31st year in education. I started out as a teacher. I was an administrator at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Now, in my current role as assistant superintendent for climate, culture, and diversity, I spent 15 of those years in higher education and judicial affairs. And then I went to work for Governor Ruth Ann Minner as a director for youth mentoring for the state of Delaware. My formal training is as a clinical psychologist, as well as trained by the Pennsylvania and New Jersey State Police in crisis intervention, active shooter preparedness. And I'm noted as one of the nation's leading anti-violence, anti-bullying prevention experts in the country. And it is a passion of mine simply because I was a victim of bullying in 6th grade. And from there, it kind of transcended into forming an organization, which is a national platform now, 501c3, called teachanti-bullying.org. I've written 20 books on the subject matter, and most recently, my newest book called Inside the Mind of a Bully, From Victim to Advocate. I'm married with 3 teens. 2 of the teens have gone through this process of being victims themselves. But I think one of the greatest things that I've done currently is we've established national legislation in 3 states. And that is something that I've been working very hard. The irony of this story or introduction is I live in a state where, unfortunately, in the last 8 years, I still can't get anti-bullying legislation, but I got it passed with Governor Christie, and I got it passed with Governor Carnell in Delaware. So it's kind of sad that I live in a state where I can't even get legislation passed to protect young people. And I also have firsthand experience as a niece who was a victim, or not a victim, but a student at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 4th grade when Adam Lanza visited there in 2012. So there's been a lot of trauma. We look at this issue as a pervasive public health issue. We continue to fight the fight here, and it takes a lot of people, including all of you that are joining us tonight, to be a part of this proactive approach.
Thank you, Dr. C. And now, Dr. Cam.
I have to go after that? That's impressive. So I am Dr. Cameron Caswell, and I am an adolescent psychologist and a parent coach. And so I have been working for the past 20 some years with these kids that are being bullied or the kids that are bullying, and really get their perspective and also help the parents understand what's going on with their kids, because we often put the bully as the bad guy, when a lot of times the bully is also the victim in a case and something's going on. So looking beyond that and helping kids that are being bullied, giving them a voice, helping them learn to self-advocate in a way that actually works. So that's been my focus. I'm really thrilled to actually meet you, Dr. C, and what you do. And I'm very thankful for everything that you do, because I do see these kids and we do need legislation and help to protect these kids.
Thank you as well for what you do for us and our children.
I'm very excited to have both of you as part of this conversation tonight. And because we had some newcomers come in, I wanted to say that if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or throw that in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and get started with our conversation. So the first question I'd like to pose to you two, Dr. C and Dr. C, what is the definition of bullying and what are the forms that it takes on? Dr. Cam, I'll start with you. Or Dr. C, you unmuted first, so whoever.
Oh, please let Dr. Cam go. It's fine.
Perfect.
No, it's all right. I mean, bullying is really something that it goes on consistently. It's not a one-time deal, right? It's something that's continuously going, and it's someone that is really trying to aggravate and harm somebody that feels like they can't help themselves. So I think we see something that's very aggravated and purposeful, and consistent. In terms of forms, it is all kinds of forms. It's physical, which is the obvious. There's a lot of social bullying, which I think we see very frequently with girls. There is the cyberbullying that we see. There's emotional bullying. There's a lot of different bullying. And I think what is interesting is that bullying is not something that is obvious. A lot of times it's very underhanded. It's very subtle. Sometimes kids that are being bullied don't even realize they're being bullied until they are now responding to it because they feel like something's wrong with me. And that's what I've seen a lot too, where the kids are now saying, I deserve this. And so there's a lot of kind of emotional and social manipulation that happens with it as well.
And Dr. C?
Well, so if you learn nothing tonight at all from what we just started with, is when we look at bullying, we have to remember three operative words. It's an imbalance of power, whether it's one person or multiple people. When we look at that perpetrator, and we often focus on the bully, but we have to, as Dr. Cam is absolutely correct, we have to provide support to that particular perpetrator, not just the victim. And we often forget the victim. You know, people like Adam Lanza, you know, he went through, you know, hell and back. And let me be clear about that. And when we look at many of active shooters, who are about 177 of them were victims of being bullied themselves, and even looking at going back to Columbine. But we have to look at that psychological domain and that physical domain. And then when we break it down even further, for it to be real bullying and not just a causation of some type of disruptive behavior or defiant behavior, we have to look at that duration, that frequency, that intensity, and power base. And in order for it to be aligned, whether it is 24, 48 hours or ongoing, now we have that pattern of bullying behavior. So they're consistent when we look at the breakdown. And then, you know, we often talk about the four basic forms, which Dr. Cam illustrated: that social, that physical, that cyber, and the relationship. And that's not having those fights with your husband or significant others, but really excluding people from play or involvement. But even taking it one step, and when we look at the disability community or those with special needs, then we look at child molestation, we look at elderly victimization, we look at domestic abuse, we look at perpetrators in that regard. We look at those, like I have a son on the autism spectrum who has Asperger's. So when we look at, like, you know, a guy like Jerry Sandusky, former Penn State University coach, that uses the platform of some cyber harassment or many what we call predator apps, and we can talk about those tonight, but that is the lure. And he was charged with 37 counts of child molestation here in the state of Pennsylvania. 19 of those counts were directly cyber related to children on the spectrum. So it's an easy lure for somebody to get social acceptance. So that's why we talk about the more pressing issue in this country right now under Vice President Kamala Harris's platform is cyber harassment. And many universities are even looking into more legislative policies relating to social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram and so forth, and Yik Yak, which has come back now into the realm. So there's so much to discuss. But ultimately, what clearly defines that is it has to be, you know, again, I work in a state where we have probably the strongest legislation in the country. And not but 2 weeks ago, we proposed a bill that sent to Governor Murphy now for statewide legislation that came out of the great city of Camden. And that is now to really bring about community harassment and into school-based or harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And this is really what parents and educators and those legislators should really fight, because without teeth, we really have nothing. We have no real, you know, stronghold to hold. You know, the calls we get oftentimes are parents who say, what should I do? And that's all I really deal in and day out in New Jersey. And it's unfortunate that it just falls on deaf ears if you don't have legislation, because parents get stuck. They don't know where to turn. Principals not calling back. The assistant principals just dealing with data. So that's the unfortunate part when we get into the definition. It also expands into other realms.
So as a parent, I think, or we've all heard that term, like kids will be kids, or boys will be boys, girls will be girls. How do you draw that line, or is there a line between conflict and bullying?
Well, I mean, certainly, again, and I deal with it in schools every day, and it's a differential between, for example, in New Jersey, we have HIB legislation. So you're the parent, Dr. Cam's the parent, or parents who are on this particular Zoom. As soon as you call me or your child says I'm being bullied and whatever, I have to launch an investigation. That is under the state mandated law. I would be held accountable if we don't launch that investigation. It has to, though, raise to the criteria of which we define the criteria. It's not just I was shoved in line, or somebody budged in the cafeteria, or somebody called me whatever they called. So there's clear definitions of what it is to launch that investigation. But if there is that consistent pattern, duration, and it's not just an isolated event that's just conflictual, two elementary students not getting along in the playground, that investigation would be then launched, and a report would then be sent to our superintendent and then off to the state if it's confirmed. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers today fall on the err on the side of caution and just simply say, well, it's bullying, and they just draft it as such because they don't want to be held accountable. But again, what we're dealing with in schools across America and teacher shortages like in New Jersey is it's tough. No one wants to deal with disruptive students. So a lot of it comes back to what's going on externally. And, Dr. Cam probably sees them all the time as a clinician. You're dealing with this from a trauma-informed care position, but it's never really ending. And so we try to bridge that gap, and it's often then falls back on the parents who may or may not be doing their part of the responsibility at home. So but there is a clear distinction whether or not parents want to, they want to classify everything as bullying. That's where it really becomes a problem, because it's not.
Well, what I really like that you said, and Dr. Cam, I'll let you jump in a second. What I really like that I heard both of you say is that it's the duration and the frequency. And so I think that that line of it's not just a one-time thing, it's not just a shoving, there's a clear pattern of behavior. And I think that's what rises to the level of bullying. Dr. Cam, you were going to say something.
I was saying, there's so much where we're talking about the level of bullying, and I would love to hear from you, Dr. C, what the trend has been, because it seems that it's getting worse from my perspective. But of course, I haven't been in the business forever, so I don't know, and you probably have a lot more data. But what I've noticed also is that the world itself and adults are not treating people very well. I go into school. I was just in a few schools working with teachers, and teachers are very upset and very angry. And they bring that, not purposefully, but they bring that into the classroom. And so what we're seeing is a lot of kids that are stressed out, a lot of teachers that are stressed out, a lot of parents are stressed out. And when we're in this place of stress, we don't behave very well, and we don't respond very well. And so what we can have just day-to-day interactions that are very unkind, very mean. And I don't know if this is what happens, but it seems to be that can start building and building and building. And when somebody feels like they're victimized, they seem to keep getting in that position. And when people are getting something out or feeling like, okay, I have control here, I don't have control at home, or I don't have control in the classroom, I have control over some kid or some place that feels good, and now I'm going there. And so I feel like we want to make sure we're addressing what happens when bullying happens, but so much of what I really want to focus on, and I'm sure Dr. C wants to focus on, is what do we need to start doing to prevent this? Because we're dealing with a lot of it upstream, and we're not preventing it from occurring. And I feel like that's something we really need to drill in on. And how do we do that?
Well, you see, that's the problem. And this is my soapbox where I get real passionate. The problem is a disconnect between home and schools, and home schools and communities. And I kind of wish that, certainly we can put videos in the chats, or we can, I wish we had some more, like I have another computer here with the data and using for reference. But in New Jersey, we started the first anti-bullying club in our school district, which became a model for the state of New Jersey. So when you start an anti-bullying club and empower the kids, they don't want to listen to school counselors. They don't want to listen to social workers. They certainly don't want to be in my office or a principal's office. So we start this peer-to-peer, organization where the kids lead these particular discussions to help resolve, and there's a safety net and some level of confidentiality where they can talk to one another peer to peer, and they can build upon that trust. And so as a model now, this particular anti-bullying club formulated into a policy development for the state of New Jersey, and now the policy has been drafted for the governor's signature. But I can always share some of these videos and how we put these together, these stories. But I often feel that in order to resolve these particular conflicts, you got to deal with the whole issue of DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. You have to empower young people to have a voice. Right now, we're dealing with a disparity of social justice related issues. So there's that level of or lack of trust, lack of empowerment, lack of a voice. In our community, we have 60% L population, 40% African American, and the L population are probably victimized more than anyone, in part because they don't hear that same tone. They feel that teachers ridicule them for being from other states, in other countries. And they don't feel empowered, they don't feel involved. So that inclusivity is very important. So you got to build the infrastructure from and again, this is my realm, climate, culture. Bullying is just a tagline for other pervasive, behaviors. But it all starts with, I don't believe children are born of a mother's womb and they say, here's your deviant child, good luck with that. You can take a child, they can externally, they're part of their environment. They know what they see at home. I mean, when I was a principal in Camden, one of the most violent cities in America, I attended 19 drive-by funerals. I buried, 19 students. The trauma is real. And these are not kids simply that were victimized, but they're part of activity that's involved. And that's all they know as part of being in part of a familial gang. But a lot of it, to me, personally, which again, we fall short in America. It's all about data and testing, but you can't get that academic data and testing and student achievement if kids don't feel safe and secure, if there's not that sense of nurturing and that climate and culture is stable. Otherwise, you really have nothing. They can't learn with teachers who are fearful. And that's in part why teachers are, leaving the profession. New Jersey right now is in crisis. We have a task force to try to find teachers. We just can't. Even at $70,000 a year, we can't find them. They just don't want to deal with it. Classroom management, they get one course, undergraduate. I've taught it. Then what? They don't know about bullying and gang. They didn't sign up for any of that stuff. So you got to build the infrastructure. You got to provide a safe haven for learning. Teachers have to be supported. Dr. Cam says she goes into these schools. Teachers are not supported by their administrators. I mean, they're never around. Believe me, I'm in it. I see it. We have weak leaders at every level, national, federal, and in our schools. And that's a problem in this country. So, until
Dr. C, I want to jump in for a second because you said something really important that I'm putting myself in the shoes of these parents that are logged in today. And you mentioned empowering our children to have a voice.
Yes.
So how do we go about doing that? How do we help our child if our child is being bullied?
Sure.
How do we help them to have a voice? And then I'm going to ask the flip side, if we find out our child is the bully, how do we help them to also find their voice in a healthier way?
Well, just like in your role, you're a clinical social worker. You may have to be the voice, right? Because a lot of children, especially those on the spectrum or those with hidden disabilities, don't have that sense of self-advocacy or coping skills. So you may be that voice. Dr. Cam is that voice. I often become the voice, or the news media becomes a voice for me. And that's the last, people you want to show up at your front door to school. But, at the very least, is if a child says he or she's being victimized, first of all, believe what they're saying. A lot of times children on the spectrum, especially my son David with Asperger's, nobody believed them. It was just a myth. And he just continued to fall victim until, my wife attended a conference I did on children who are victimized. And all of a sudden, we started to raise some heck in a very prominent school district in Pennsylvania, and people listen. So it's unfortunate it takes advocacy, but to empower young people, that's where, like, my son developed an empowerment club at his local high school, and getting young people to have a crutch to say, you can do it, that motivation, that intrinsic passion to help support somebody who may never have that internal mechanism to stand up for himself or herself. The other piece of it is developing, microaggression programs under, the equity and diversity and inclusion platforms, where those young people of marginalized backgrounds have a voice, and they see people like themselves, and they know they can do things, and they're not ridicule. There's that internal racial bias among many teachers in this country. So there, I don't even know where to start. It is such a disarray in this country. I mean, I don't even know if you disband the Department of Education and start over, because it's a mess. We are a laughing stock among the world, and you think about where we have to do, and the facts are that you have to start at ground root level where the parents and the children are involved, and they get off of like the endemic, which are still coming out of that, to your point before about the disparity of why there's such trauma. They're still coming out of that whole COVID issue. So there's that issue. Do we focus on trauma-informed care, mindfulness, social emotional learning, or is it all academic data? Because that's all the state looks at. You see, we're not looking at mental health. It's a disparity in this country, and that's why we have all these issues, all the shootings, all the guns. I mean, anyway.
No, Dr. C, I agree with you there too, because one of the things that frustrates me a lot is we hear so much about learning loss and trying to speed up and get them caught up in learning, and nobody's really talking about the social emotional development and the loss there. And so we're throwing kids back in with added pressure that they've got to not just learn, but they've got to quickly catch up to where they should have been. And these kids are struggling with their emotional development, their anxiety and everything else. And so we're just adding so much more pressure to them, and they're not able to cope. And so we see this coming out in behaviors where they're bullying other kids, they're bullying teachers, they're angry, and they don't know how to get this and get out. And I think another way, and what I want to do, is empower the parents and what parents can do to really make sure their kids have a voice. And sometimes this is hard to hear for parents, but we've got to let kids have a voice at home, which means they got to be able to say no. They've got to be able to express their opinions, and they've got to be able to be heard and taken seriously at home. And sometimes this is really difficult because we often think as parents, we're doing our job well, and our kids are good when they're compliant, when they just do what we say. But when we raise compliant kids, we're raising kids that do not know how to speak up for themselves. I just worked with a child who was sexually assaulted, and she did not know how to say no because she's not allowed to say no. And so when we put them out there and we don't empower them in the house to have a voice, they will never have a voice out in the real world. So what we want to do is give them a chance when they argue back. Let them argue, have a conversation with them, turn it into a dialogue, understand what they're trying to say, help them learn how to express themselves in a better way, because they'll express themselves in a poor way that comes across as disrespectful. Help them, rather than shutting down what they're saying, help them rephrase and learn how to express themselves, because that's where they build the confidence to stand up for themselves when they go out into the real world where there's going to be mean people.
I really love what both of you just said, and I want to point out two things that I jotted down over here. I really like the idea of helping kids to find a voice at home, and also that line between enabling them and also advocating for them outside of the home. So what does that line look like? Dr. C mentioned, and you mentioned, Dr. Cam, that there's so much stress at the school level. So if we find out that our child is being bullied, what does effective communication look like at the school level? Because it almost feels very overwhelming as a parent. Like, you want them to find their voice. You don't want to create a bigger problem. I know for me as a therapist, I've had so many kids that are like, yes, this is happening, but if my parent says something, it's just going to make it worse. So what is that line for advocating for them and also teaching them to advocate for themselves?
So this is, and I'm a mom of a teen too. So this is what I've done with my own teenager. Is my teen is, and since she's a little kid, has been in all of the meetings with me. So she not only is part of there because she always has a voice, we always run it by her, but she also hears me advocating for her. She hears the teachers advocating for her, and we give her an opportunity to express it herself. She's an amazing advocate for herself now, like has learned it from the ground up how to do it. And she can speak up in a very respectful way. And it took her a while. So we want to bring the kids in. The other thing that I really want to just stress is when you go into a school to ask for help, go in as a someone that wants to collaborate, not as a blame pointing the finger. What I'm seeing and what I saw when I was working with the teachers and what I see when I work with parents, there's a lot of this going on, a lot of this. If they would just do this, this is their fault. And when we get stuck in that, nothing good is coming out of it. Nobody's getting helped. And right now, everyone feels like they're the ones being blamed, but it's your fault and no accountability is being taken. So we want to go in saying, I know you guys are doing what you can. Here's the situation, document it, have very clear details of what's going on. So it's not just hearsay randomness. Say, this is what's happening. This is how often it's happened. This is what's right. This is what we've tried to do. What can we do? What can we do together to prevent this? Because we're on the same team and we're trying to do this together. And that way we're going to come to a solution rather than now butting heads with one another and getting angry at each other and probably bullying each other now, which we see.
Dr. C, do you have anything to add to that?
Look, whenever parents raise a concern about bullying, and it's generally that is the tagline. They don't just say, hey, my child is being picked on, but it is bullying because they know that there'll be, especially again, and I use New Jersey because it's just too familiar to me. But we try to bridge that by bringing both sets of parents in. We do mediations. We do what's called a BIP, a behavioral improvement plan, because typically we learn that the parents, first of all, the parents have no idea what's going on, especially when it's a cyber related issue. So they don't really know because they don't see the phones. Now we use Yonder. What I did in my district is I took away cell phones, grades 6 through 12. So we use what's called a Yonder pouch. About 1,000 districts in America do use the Yonder. It's the way that we tried to eliminate, and it worked, to eliminate cyber harassment, cyberbullying. But prior to that, we basically brought parents in to a big conference room and we would hear both sides of the stories. And then when the parents came and said, you did this, you did that, is that what I hear? To Dr. Cam's point, you have that collaboration. The issue that I have in my role, because I oversee all the principals, is I wish it wouldn't have fallen on deaf ears prior. And you're right, there's a lot of finger pointing, and in part, however, rightly so, because it should have never have gone on for weeks, months, and then it comes to me, and then I have to say, well, why was this not reported? It was reported. I told the principal whatever amount of months ago, which is the sad, which it comes back to, again, the leadership variable, because they're so focused on the academics that most of the principals, unless they're deans of students or assistant principals, are dealing with behavior, but they can't deal with everything, 600, 700 kids, 1,200 kids. But the first line of defense is that there's clear documentation. I always tell parents, make sure that it's in writing. Don't have phone calls with your teachers, some form of documentation. And then from there, there's that form of investigation. But what we try to do is bring both families together. We then have conferences with our social workers to talk independently with both students, because typically a lot of the drama we see, especially in our middle and high school, are with girls. And it's generally, unfortunately, over a boy, sad to say, or something that was posted online, which is just unfortunate. And that's kind of why then going back, I mean, if you really want to, work this issue and say, well, how do we resolve it proactively, is you got to push for legislation in whatever state you're in if you don't have it. Because in order for something to, especially now in New Jersey, when something happens at 3 o'clock on Friday, you can't get away from it. We have a municipal law that protects children who are victims, and then parents are held accountable. Before all of that, they have to go through a civic engagement, professional development, and an education platform. And if they don't want to do that, it's fine. Then there'll be sanctioned $50 to $500. So, that's how it works. It has been working. We saw a drastic reduction in bullying related incidences in New Jersey, almost cut in half last year, from 12,000 reported to 6,700. And the reason it's even at 6,700 is as soon as a parent or a student says, hey, I've been bullied, it's documented and a HIB has to be raised. The difference is whether it's founded or unfounded. But that is, but that whole idea is, if you can establish these groups, do parental involvement, parental engagement. We do have a whole engagement department. And again, you got to listen to the kids. The kids are saying it's happening. It generally is. But it also then comes back to the teachers in the classroom. You know, what are they doing instructionally? Are they meeting the needs of the kids? I mean, there's a whole circle here that by the time it gets to board, the reason is that kids are disruptive because they're not learning in the first place. So, I mean, where do you go? I mean, who do you want to point the finger at? It's a whole real, you know, kind of strategic plan to put together. And certainly the parent is at the forefront of that.
So I do love this idea and this theme of just listening to your kids, because I do think oftentimes, sadly, we as parents get caught up in our own world, and intentionally or unintentionally, we dismiss what the teenage experience looks like. And so even if something may not be called bullying, or we went through it ourselves and it'll be fine, you'll pass through it. What I hear both of you saying really is just listening to your child and being a voice and advocating for them. Dr. C, you did bring up social media, so I feel like we cannot let this hour go past without talking about social media and the impact that that has on our children. I think that for most of us, when we were growing up, social media may have just been started or was not around. And so if you were being bullied at school, it stopped on Friday at 4 o'clock when you didn't have school anymore. It stopped on Tuesday by the time you got home. With social media now, we're seeing that bullying can just continue, and it spirals in a way that I don't even know that most of us adults understand. I think kids are very crafty with the apps that they also find. And so how do we manage that? Because, you know, teenagers don't want us in their business. They don't want us reading their phones. But I feel like as a parent, you sort of have to, right?
It's a little bit of everything. I think one of the you know, strategies I've seen is just don't let kids have their phones, or don't let them have apps. Obviously there's a certain age where that is a smart thing to do, but then we get to the point where the reality is that is now pulling them away from their social interactions and basically what their life is. So preventing them to get on their phones or have apps that their friends are on is not a good long-term solution, because now we're really separating them and making that even harder. Well, plus, like you just said, kids are very good at finding ways around it. And so we don't want our kids going behind our backs to do it because we're not letting them do it, and they will. We want to make sure that what they're doing, that we're educating them, that we're teaching them, that we're modeling it. And I think modeling it is the biggest thing. We can lecture until we have no breath left. And if we are going and doing exactly opposite of what we just did, it has zero power. So I think a lot of this is modeling. What does it look like to be responsible online? What does responsible tech use look like? What does polite conversations and kind conversations online look like? What do kids deserve to be like? How do we talk to our kids? How do we allow people to talk to our kids so they learn what's okay to be said to them? And how do I voice, and what do I do if somebody is saying something mean to me? I see a lot of kids online that know how to navigate this. And there's bullies out there, but they're able to navigate it, and they're able to protect themselves and stay away. So we need to teach them how to do that. That's what's key, because they're going to go out and do their phone at some point, someday in their life. And if we've not trained them and helped them learn how to use it appropriately, they're going to get caught up in it some way or another. So we've got to make sure we're in on the ground floor, teaching them to use it responsibly.
So I want to jump in because we do have a question in the chat, and I want to make sure we get to that. So the question is, what is the best thing to say to my kid if he comes home one day and says he was bullied? If my kid is physically bullied, should he fight back physically?
My first response, it's just never, you know, certainly you want to defend yourself and protect yourself from injury. I would never advocate fighting back. I mean, and that was my problem growing up. That's why my nose was shattered and my teeth were broken. And I went home and said nothing to my parents. And, you know, unfortunately, plastic surgery repairs the outside of my face, but intrinsically, you still have that internal trauma for what kids did to you. This parent's child is a hero in my book from walking away, and then you simply will deal with it from either a law enforcement standpoint or from an educational administrative standpoint. The key is to let the parent know. The parent has to be proactive and say, I trust in what you're saying. You were victimized, And then you file a report. You file a report with your local police department, and you also let your school district officials know that your son or daughter was in fact physically assaulted, because that's what that would be. Fighting back is certainly, and now again, in that particular case, if it's ongoing, now we have bullying. If it's isolated, it's an assault or summary offense, and you will be cited accordingly for that in each individual municipality. But I would never advocate for fighting back. I mean, that just causes further injury. Somebody else gets hurt, or, in some cases it turns lethal. So that approach, if the parents would say, I would want to know about it, and you would handle it accordingly with those particular authorities.
Dr. C, I'd like to add to just in a way of how to approach it from that respect, because what we want to make sure we do when our kids come to us is do not overreact. Because the second you go, oh my gosh, we got to call, what are we going to, as soon as you go to that mode, your kid will never tell you again. So we need to stay calm, because otherwise they're going to read us. We also want to make sure that our kids are part of the decision we make. I've had kids tell me, I've told my parents, and oh my gosh, I begged them not to do this. They just made it worse, and they kept doing this, and then they called this person and they made it so much worse for me. We need to make sure we keep the kids involved, and we talk to them, and we help them understand either why we're doing it. We hear from their perspective, like, don't go calling the parents. That could make it way worse, right? So we need to really understand what the best way forward is. But in the moment when your kid is in that situation and they've come and they've told you, we want to stay calm. We want to listen to them, not put judgment, not say, did you do this? Or what did you do? Or anything else. Just listen to them, empathize with them. That must have been really tough. That must have been hard. I'm proud of you for stepping away. That must have been really tough to do. How are you doing now? We're not going to put any judgment. We're not going to make them feel bad about being bullied, right? Because if we make it a big deal, all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh. We just want to validate where they're at. And once they get to that point and we start talking and we've calmed down and we're both in a good place, then we can say, let's see what we need to do next. And let's come up with a plan together of what we need to do. And that's when you want to step over to what Dr. C was saying. Absolutely. But I just want to make sure that your child, again, they're learning how to self-advocate. If they're part of the solution, they're also feeling empowered, which is what they need desperately at this point, if they're part of the solution.
I love that. And I love how both of you, your advice goes such hand in hand with how to advocate for your child on a larger level, but also how to support them in that moment. And always, again, assuming that what your child is saying is real and valid, because it is their experience. Dr. C, you also made a really good point that I want to talk about is how do we, like, once those outside wounds heal, if there's outside wounds, how do we support our kids emotionally with the recovery after being bullied or being the bully?
Well, and I think that's where the peer groups, community groups, even perhaps some, families or children get involved in community-based groups, whether they're part of the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or sports teams. They may need that peer support and have a good friend to talk to. And if they don't, that's where some, perhaps they may get involved with some therapy. And that's very important, especially if they've been victimized. It's very good to get that mental health, because parents can only go so far from a nurturing standpoint, but you may want to get them some therapy. And that's where a lot of times, unfortunately, in many communities, they don't have insurance, they don't have funding. So the therapy falls by the wayside and children just internalize it. And then you have that hidden trauma that is with them for years and may, come out at some point in their life. But again, I often, that's just why I'm so big upon the anti-bullying clubs and empowerment clubs, where kids are part of something and they feel they have a safety net and assurance and reassurance in a school setting. And if there isn't a school setting, perhaps a youth group, a church-based youth group, a faith-based group that they can be a part of, to be able to, lend some support. They'll need that, believe me. I went through that, my own daughter, over something that was cyber related. And again, while the district knew who I was, and I live in Pennsylvania, everybody wrapped around my daughter. But I can share as a parent, this is one of my slides. If you can see that, this is my daughter. This is in the parking lot. She's a senior last year. She's a sophomore in college. but basically saying in her second part of her senior year, she wants to transfer out simply for dating a young man in a rival high school. They ostracized her and posted. It was heartbreaking for me in doing this and then being a parent, and everybody wrapped around. And the sad part to this point is that about a year ago, she wrote me a long text and said, "Dad, I wish we had that conversation with this child in question's parents in the principal's office." And we never could do that. The principal did not want to set that up. He did not feel that that was going to resolve anything, whereby I wanted that to be there with the child's parents. But that still traumatized her today, and it still haunts her today, that she didn't have that opportunity to speak to him and say, "This is how you made me feel, that I wanted to transfer out in my senior year," which was heartbreaking for me. So they need to belong to someone. Yes, I wrapped around her. We all wrapped around her. Her friends wrapped around her, but there was still that sense of emptiness because I don't think she was heard. And so part of that is the closure to face your victim or your accused. And that is in part why even in court, we have the victimization process where you want to face that person that did something to you or took someone's life and say, "This is what you did." And I finally can get a sense of closure. It's very important to the soul.
I do want to pause for a second. Jill, if you can put the survey in the chat again, we do have a quick survey that helps the foundation with our programming and how to move forward. So before you log off, if you can complete that survey, that would be great. We do have another question in the chat. Is there a specific age or grade level when kids start to bully? Is there an age range when most bullying occurs?
Well, I look, the age range is becoming younger and younger, unfortunately, with social media. And it depends when the parent, this is my daughter's old iPhone 7. It's up for sale if anybody wants it. The point I'm making is, I fell victim to giving her this at 9 years of age. And it was not the right move as a parent for me. But I did it because we all want to make our kids happy and be cool, right? I didn't have these things, but try to limit the technology as much as you can. There's no need. We're seeing infants with iPads in front of them in restaurants. I cringe when I see it. And it's not like we're naive. We know they're going to learn. But right now, the biggest concern I have when it comes to cyberbullying is the things that we don't know. And I often get into programming where we talk about predator apps. And predator apps are things that it would be horrifying if I shared in another platform. But things that kids have, whether the fake Snapchats or even the fake high calculator apps and what they do. I mean, they start as young as 5 years old, first graders, sixth graders. We've seen things that a Virginia student shot his teacher. It's a first grader. They get these ideas because they're inundated. And going back to the parental question is, we have more and more young parents who are learning parenting. But the key is using Life 360, using apps that you can identify, turning off Snap Map. Your kids should turn that off. You don't need to be identified where you're located, where your friends are. It causes perpetrator, danger. So you don't want that. So the more you know about technology and what it does, the right way versus the wrong way for parents is really important. And certainly as the parent, you have the right, unless they bought that phone and they're paying that phone bill. And even then, until they're emancipated, and I'm talking about living on their own goddamn apartment, you have every right to look on that phone. Now, yeah, tread lightly, but if you suspect that your child's harming himself or herself or others, I want to see your phone. And you make sure that when you look at the phone, make sure you open the app, because these are examples of fake apps that I share with parents, and there's things behind the apps that kids hide that you wouldn't even know that are there. So for example, Tinder, Kik, Yik Yak, Whisper, Snapchat, Zoom. I mean, there's things, Ask FF, Volti. They're all fake apps that kids, high calculators, the worst. It looks like, oh, I'm doing math, but behind it, they're hiding pornographic porn photos, things that you would never imagine that your children, you say, oh my God, as young as sixth grade, fifth grade. I mean, it's been early on with me. I've seen so many cases, it's tragic. But you have every right to say, I want to see your phone. And if they have problems, then that's how you identify it. And unfortunately, you have to help support that teacher and that community, because it could be a threat to someone.
I agree with you completely that you have the right and you need to be monitoring what they're doing. I want to throw in a little bit on an approach that I would recommend, because we also don't want to now create and become the enemy of our kids. We don't want to create this sense of shame or this creative or like push them away, because they will get very, very good at lying to us. And that's the worst thing that can happen, right? Is them now being deceitful for us, because now we really have no ability to track. So when you do this, we have to make sure they've got their phone. We know what apps are on there, and we have an agreement with them that we are going to look through it with them. Please do not go behind their back and start reading their stuff and going through their stuff. They will know that, and they will not trust you. And when they don't trust you, we are not going to be able to have a lot of impact on our kids, and we're going to have a big uphill climb to go, and we need for them to trust us. So we want to focus. This is about making sure they're safe, not catching them in a lie. This is about making sure we're giving them the skills they need, not catching them and punishing them for doing something wrong. So if you're going on with them and they know you're going on with them, if you see something on there that should not be on there, rather than freaking out and getting upset, let's get curious. What's going on here? What are you using this for? Do you know the dangers of this? This is why I'm concerned. We're going to start addressing this. This is not something I'm comfortable with you having, right? Let's understand this. And the reason I want to approach it again, because A, we're showing we're on their side so that they can trust us. We're having now the ability to teach them how to do it appropriately rather than hiding it from us and justifying hiding it from us. And that's what we really need to do. So I think what we do is we definitely have to set the guidelines, and we definitely have to keep tabs on it, but we have to do it in a way that's upfront and transparent and builds trust, doesn't erode it.
And as a follow-up, Dr. C mentioned a lot of apps that some of you may not have heard of before. We will send a follow-up email to everyone that registered that has some of these apps and any other additional resources that Dr. C and Dr. Cam have for us. We have a comment, not a question, but a comment in the chat that I think you should create a reward program for kids who inform about the bullies in school, but anonymous, of course. That is an awesome suggestion.
Only thing I'm going to throw in there, and I wanted to ask Dr. C this, because what I've seen numerous times is that one form of bullying is basically calling somebody a bully and reporting them as a bully. So I've seen this done to a few kids, particularly kids on the spectrum, who have said kids have reported them as assaulting or bullying them, which they have done nothing. And those kids have then been thrown out of school. The kids that were bullied. So I want to ask you, what do we do? And so I love this idea of reporting. My fear is that, will people use that appropriately, or will they use that to bully as well? Does that make sense?
Well, it's sad because they often think children on the spectrum, they lack credibility, and that's what happens. So that's why it's very important that the investigative process is so thorough. And the sad part, again, I hate to say it, if I wasn't in it and I didn't see it, I wouldn't be able to deliver this message, is that if people drop the ball, which oftentimes occurs, it's unfortunate, then this is why things are often missed. And it takes all parties. It takes the parents, it takes our teachers, it takes school resource officers, security officials. You know, it's an entire community to see something, say something. These are very critical, you know, in terms of treading lightly when there is a victim, and also working with that particular perpetrator or that bully. We often, you know, forget and negate them. But they need support too. And they may be lashing out to loss of life. Maybe they've lost a sibling to COVID, which happens a lot, or their parents. So they're lashing out on their pets, their siblings. You know, we have that form of relationship bullying, and they'll turn lethal, and we don't want that to others or to themselves. So it's not an easy process, this issue that's been going on since Tagged in 2006, and it took the death of Phoebe Prince in Massachusetts to have bullying be a tagline. There was no bullying prior to that. The word never existed. CNN coined it. So now we're faced with it, and I think you know, in closing, at some point here, we have to be proactive and continue to work together as a nation and as a community, and as families. And certainly I'm certain you could reach out to Dr. Cameron, myself, if you have issues or concerns, and we can provide you that support. But this is something that why I keep pushing for national legislation is important that all 50 states adopt the same, because some people feel that this is still just a rite of passage and it will go away. It will not. It will only get worse with technology and the invention of the iPhone 15 and iPhone 30. So kids are savvy. They're smarter than we are. I'm an old school guy, but you keep on top of it and you learn from the kids. They teach you the new lingo. They teach you the apps and the surveys. But I think, again, love and embrace your children, work in collaboration with the school officials. It's very important than pointing the finger. Being reactive is too late. But it's a sad state of affairs, because right now the biggest concern in this country is teen suicide. It's the second cause of death among our teens at 4,600 a year. And the CDC has coined this a severe pervasive issue. And it really does start with children just not having a sense of self and self-concept and self-esteem, and then certainly what goes on behind the screen or that platform. So we got to just keep fighting. It is a mission for us, for me certainly, and I keep doing what we can do to save a life. It's sad. It's sad. I just think about the many cases that we've had and compensation, that the parents to districts. But what's $9 million, $10 million to you when you lost your child to cyber harassment? They're never coming back. And I say that because I've been part of that on both sides, and it's just traumatizing. So. But thank you for allowing me to just voice that final comment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. C. And Dr. Cam, your final words.
I'm just going to reiterate, we've got to believe our kids. We've got to listen to our kids, and we've got to be on our kids' side and let them know. But we also have to stay calm and make sure that we're not adding to the stress of it. The other thing is, and as Dr. C just said too, we've got to look at what's going on with the kids that are bullying too. We can't just assume they're bad kids, because kids don't act this way for no reason. We don't lash out and hurt people if we're not hurting inside. So I think we also need to focus on that as well. And I think the biggest thing is we have got to figure out how to work upstream and prevent this from happening, because it is just getting progressively worse. And all of that starts in the home. It starts by helping our kids learn to self-advocate and helping our kids learn to appreciate and feel appreciated for who they are. And I think that's a very difficult thing for us to do sometimes, because we often get very focused on what they need to do better, what grades they need to do better, how they need to act better. And they start getting a message that I'm not enough. I'm not going to be better. So we also need to focus on what are our kids doing well and how are our kids learning to self-advocate.
Well, again, I thank you both so much. I think this is such an important topic, and I think every parent is worried about bullying, especially the cyberbullying. And it's such a world that's so foreign to so many of us. And so learning those skills of how to support our kids. I love the, not even thinking about just your kid or your school, but the legislative piece, which I think we don't talk about or even think about often enough. So much it's, how do we take care of my own in this moment? But I think you guys left us with some amazing jewels of listening to your child, being a voice for them, but also empowering them to find their voice. I want to thank all the parents that came on today, and hopefully we will see you on November 9th when we talk about athletes and mental wellness, because I think that is another population that we don't pay enough attention to. So again, if you have any questions, if you have any last words, we will be on for a few more minutes. I saw something just pop up in the chat. Do you have a line with counselor for help to the kids when they need to call someone and just talk? I'm not sure what you mean by that list. So if you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit what you're asking.
It's like a helpline. Is that what you mean? Like, is there a helpline to call if someone if a child, not just, but if a child wants to talk to somebody? Is that what you mean? because I have a list I can share of a ton of hotlines that kids can call for different things, and it includes hotlines for bullying. Okay.
Yes.
That's-
So yes, and again, we will send out an email probably by Tuesday, Wednesday of next week that has all of the different resources. I'm actually very excited to see this list of apps that you have, Dr. C, because I feel like sadly and scarily that list keeps growing every year. So thank you all and have a fantastic night.
You as well.
Bill, you can stop the recording.